It started with a whisper. At least, that's what I told myself in the beginning. A faint murmur, like the wind brushing through the trees, but there was no wind that night, and the trees outside my bedroom window stood still as gravestones. The sound was coming from inside the house, more precisely, from within the walls. I'd moved into the old house a month before. It was a creaking, ancient thing, perched on the edge of a small town where everyone knew each other's business. The realtor had called it charming and full of character, but all I saw was decay. The floors groaned underfoot, the windows were perpetually fogged with dust, and the wallpaper peeled like the skin of something dead and forgotten. Yet, I was drawn to it. Maybe it was the price, dirt cheap for such a large place, or maybe it was the way the house seemed to call to me when I first saw it. Either way, I signed the papers and moved in, eager to start anew after a messy breakup. I tried to tell myself it was just stress, that moving into a new place and being alone was taking a toll on my mental health. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. Something was wrong with the house, something evil, but I couldn't leave. I don't know why, but the thought of leaving filled me with a sense of dread so overwhelming that it made me physically ill. It was as if the house had a hold on me, as if it wouldn't let me go. Then the whispers turned into voices, distinct, separate voices that I could understand. They spoke of death, of pain, of unspeakable horrors that made my blood run cold. They whispered secrets in my ear, secrets I didn't want to know, secrets that made me question my sanity. I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. I became a shell of my former self, hollowed out by the voices that wouldn't leave me alone. I tried to reach out for help, but every time I picked up the phone, the line would go dead, and I'd hear the voices on the other end, whispering, laughing. One night, the voices were louder than ever, so loud that they drowned out my thoughts, filled my head with their malevolent words. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what they wanted, what they were, why they were tormenting me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I talked back. I asked them what they wanted, who they were, why they wouldn't leave me alone. And to my surprise, they answered. "We are the forgotten," they said, their voices blending together into a single echoing chorus. "The ones who were lost, the ones who were left behind. We are the dead, and we are trapped here, in this place, in these walls." My blood turned to ice. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We want to be free," they said. "We want to be released from this prison, to move on, to find peace. But we cannot leave, not without help. You must help us." I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. How could I help them? What did they expect me to do? "You must open the door," they said. "You must let us out." I didn't understand what they meant, but I was too terrified to ask. All I knew was that I wanted them gone, wanted the whispers to stop, wanted my life back. So I agreed. I told them I'd help them, that I'd do whatever they wanted if they'd just leave me alone. The voices went silent, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I thought it was over, that they'd finally left me in peace. But I was wrong. It was only the beginning. The next day, I woke up to find a door in the basement that I'd never seen before. It was an old wooden door, heavy and worn, with a rusted iron handle. It was embedded in the far wall of the basement, partially hidden behind a stack of old boxes and crates. The door was covered in strange symbols that seemed to pulse and glow in the dim light. I don't know how I knew, but I was certain this was the door the voices had spoken of. The door I was supposed to open. A part of me wanted to turn around and run, to get as far away from that door as possible. But another part of me, the part that had been worn down by weeks of torment, wanted to get it over with, to open the door and end this nightmare once and for all. So I reached out and grabbed the handle. It was cold, colder than anything I'd ever touched, and it sent a shock of pain through my hand. But I didn't let go. I couldn't. The door had a pull, a force that wouldn't let me turn away. With a deep breath, I turned the handle and pulled the door open. What I saw on the other side defies description. It was as if the door had opened into another world, a world of darkness and shadows, of pain and suffering, of lost souls and forgotten memories. The air was thick with the stench of decay, and the ground was slick with blood. I could hear the whispers again, louder now, more desperate, more urgent. I tried to shut the door, tried to close off whatever horror I'd just unleashed, but the door wouldn't budge. It was as if it had fused with the wall, as if it was now a part of the house, a part of me. And then they came. The spirits, the ghosts, the things that had been trapped behind that door for so long. They came pouring out, a torrent of shadows and screams, of faces twisted in agony and despair. They swarmed around me, filling the room with their presence, their pain. I fell to the ground, clutching my head as the voices filled my mind, screaming, crying, begging for release. They overwhelmed me, their emotions crashing over me like a tidal wave, pulling me under, drowning me in their misery. I don't know how long I lay there, surrounded by the dead, their voices echoing in my skull. It felt like hours, days, years. Time had no meaning in that place, in that darkness. When I finally came to, the basement was empty. The door was gone, and the only evidence of what had happened was the blood on the floor and the whispers that still echoed in the walls. But the whispers were different now. They were quieter, softer, almost peaceful. The spirits were still there, still trapped, but they were no longer angry, no longer desperate. I had done what they asked. I had opened the door, and in doing so, I had given them a chance at peace, a chance to move on. But in doing so, I had also sealed my fate. The house was no longer mine. It belonged to them now, to the dead, to the forgotten. I was just a guest, a caretaker, a guardian. I was tied to the house, bound to it by the same forces that had kept the spirits trapped for so long. I couldn't leave, even if I wanted to. The house wouldn't let me. It had claimed me, just as it had claimed the others before me. I was a part of it now, just as it was a part of me. And so I stay. I listen to the whispers, the voices of the dead, the souls that are still trapped within these walls. I try to help them, to ease their suffering, to give them the peace they so desperately seek. But I know that one day I will become one of them. One day my voice will join the chorus. My soul will be trapped within these walls, just like all the others. And when that day comes, I hope someone will hear my whispers. I hope someone will open the door, will let me out, will set me free. But until then, I will wait, I will listen, I will whisper, and I will pray that someone someday will hear me. It's been a year since I first opened the door, a year since I first heard the whispers, since I became a part of this house. The days blend together now, an endless cycle of darkness and despair. The voices in the walls have grown louder, more insistent, as if they know something I don't. The spirits are restless. I can feel it in the air, in the way the house groans and creaks at night, in the way the shadows seem to move on their own. They're angry, desperate for release, for freedom, but there's nothing I can do to help them. I've tried everything, every ritual, every prayer, but nothing works. They're still trapped, and so am I. I've become a prisoner in my own home, a caretaker for the dead. I spend my days wandering the halls, listening to the whispers, trying to make sense of the madness that has consumed me. But the more I listen, the less I understand. The voices speak in riddles, in half-remembered memories, in fragments of a past long forgotten. Sometimes I catch glimpses of them, shadows flitting at the edge of my vision, faces peering out from the darkness. They're always watching, always waiting. They know I'm their only hope, but they also know I'm powerless to help them. But deep down, I know the truth. I'm not dead, not yet, but the house is killing me slowly, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but a hollow shell, a shadow of the person I once was. And when that day comes, when I finally succumb to the darkness, I know I'll join the others in the walls, my voice just another whisper in the endless chorus of the damned. But until then, I wait, I listen, I whisper, and I pray that someone someday will hear me. It's almost over, I can feel it. The house is closing in on me, the walls pressing against me, suffocating me with their presence. The whispers have reached a fever pitch, a deafening roar that drowns out my thoughts, my memories, my very sense of self. The shadow is here too. It's always here now, a constant companion, a dark presence that never leaves my side. It doesn't bother hiding anymore. It stands in the corner of the room, watching me with eyes that burn with an unnatural light, its form shifting and writhing like a mass of black smoke. It speaks to me. Its voice a low, rumbling growl that echoes in my bones. It tells me things, horrible things, things I don't want to hear. It tells me about the house, about the souls trapped within its walls, about the darkness that dwells in the heart of this place. It tells me about myself, about the things I've done, the things I can't remember. It whispers secrets in my ear, secrets that make my blood run cold, secrets that I can't forget, no matter how hard I try. I don't know what's real anymore. The lines between reality and nightmare have blurred beyond recognition. The house is alive, a living, breathing entity that feeds off the pain and suffering of those trapped within it. And I'm a part of it now, bound to it by the same darkness that holds the spirits captive. I don't know how much longer I can hold on. The house is consuming me, devouring my mind, my soul. The whispers have become a constant presence, a never-ending drone that echoes in my skull. I can't think, can't focus, can't remember who I was before this nightmare began. But I know it's almost over. The house is preparing for something terrible, something final. The whispers have changed, their tone more urgent, more desperate. The spirits are afraid, more afraid than I've ever felt them before. They're trying to warn me, to tell me something, but I can't understand them. Their voices are a jumbled mess of words and emotions, a cacophony of sound that drowns out everything else. The shadow is closer now, its presence suffocating, overwhelming. It whispers to me, its voice a low, insidious hiss that seeps into my mind like poison. It tells me to give in, to let go, to surrender to the darkness. And a part of me wants to. A part of me is so tired, so weary of this endless nightmare, that the thought of surrendering, of letting the darkness take me, is almost appealing. But I can't, I won't. I don't know why, but something deep inside me refuses to give in, refuses to let the house win. So I fight. I fight with every ounce of strength I have left, every shred of willpower I can muster. I fight against the darkness, against the whispers, against the shadow. But it's not enough. I can feel myself slipping, my mind unraveling, my soul being pulled into the abyss. The house is winning, the darkness is winning. And then just as I'm about to give in, I hear something. A voice, clear and strong, cutting through the cacophony of whispers, the darkness, the despair. It's not a voice I recognize, but it's familiar, comforting. It calls my name, tells me to hold on, to fight, to resist the darkness. I don't know where the voice is coming from, but I cling to it, use it as a lifeline, a tether to reality. I focus on the voice, let it guide me, let it pull me back from the edge. And slowly, the darkness begins to recede. The whispers grow quieter, the shadow retreats, and the house seems to loosen its grip on me. I don't know how long I lay there, listening to the voice, letting it guide me back to myself. But eventually, the whispers stop, the darkness fades, and the house is silent. I open my eyes, and for the first time in what feels like an eternity, I feel a sense of peace. The house is still there, the spirits are still trapped, but the darkness is gone, the shadow has retreated. I don't know what happens next. The silence is almost as unsettling as the whispers, an emptiness that feels fragile, as if the slightest disturbance could shatter it and plunge me back into the chaos I just escaped. But for now, I'm free. Free from the grip of the house, the shadows, the voices that tried to swallow me whole. I get to my feet, unsteady, as if I'm relearning how to move in my own body. The room around me, once distorted and suffocating, seems almost ordinary now, though the air is still heavy with an unspoken threat. I don't know what that voice was or where it came from, but it saved me. It gave me a strength I thought I'd lost. I take a step forward, then another. I can't stay here, can't let the house get its hold on me again. I have to leave even if I don't know where to go or what waits for me outside these walls. I know I'm not alone. The souls trapped here, they're still bound, still whispering their pain. I want to help them, to set them free, but I don't know how. Maybe I never will. As I make my way through the house, I feel its eyes on me, its presence lurking just out of sight. The walls seem to shift, the floor creaks underfoot, but the shadows keep their distance. Whatever power the house held over me, it's weakened now, and I intend to keep it that way. The front door looms ahead, a portal to the unknown. My hand trembles as I reach for the handle, my mind racing with fears of what might be waiting on the other side. But I've come this far. I won't turn back now. I open the door, and the cool night air rushes in, a breath of freedom that fills my lungs. I step outside, and for the first time in ages, I feel a glimmer of hope. The house is still behind me, a dark silhouette against the starless sky, but it's no longer my prison. I don't know what comes next. Maybe the house will let me go. Maybe it won't. But I've fought too hard to give in now. Whatever happens, I'll face it. I'll keep fighting for myself, for the others trapped within those walls. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find a way to break the cycle, to end the house's hold once and for all. But for now I walk away, leaving the house behind. Its whispers fade, the darkness recedes, and I take one step after another into the unknown, into the hope of a new beginning. The filter Donnie Lee was the epitome of Instagram fame. Her followers worshipped her beauty, and she played the role flawlessly. Every selfie meticulously edited, every post crafted to draw in thousands of likes within minutes. She knew exactly how to manipulate the algorithm, and with each passing day, her follower count soared. She had the brand deals, the sponsorships, the attention of millions. But the truth gnawed at her constantly. No matter how perfect she made herself appear, it was never enough. Late at night, when the lights of her luxurious apartment flickered in the background, Danny would stare at her reflection in the mirror, scrutinizing every tiny imperfection. Her skin wasn't as smooth as it looked on screen. Her nose wasn't as sharp, her lips weren't as plump. The real Donnie didn't match the digital version, and she hated it. One night, as she scrolled through her latest comments, she noticed a peculiar message on her latest selfie. "Your skin looks unreal. You should try the filter for true perfection. DM me for details." At first, she rolled her eyes. Danny had tried every app, every filter, every editing software known to influencers. Nothing could surprise her, but something about that message gnawed at her. She clicked on the account. It was a strange one. No profile picture, no posts, just a bio that read, "For those who crave to be seen." Curiosity got the best of her. She sent a quick DM, "What's the filter?" The response came almost instantly, a link and a short message, "For those who want to be flawless no matter the cost." The link was suspicious, but Danny's vanity overpowered her caution. Against her better judgment, she clicked it. The page it led to was bare, just a black screen with a button in the center that read, "Download the filter." No descriptions, no disclaimers. It was almost too simple, but the lure of true perfection was too strong to resist. She clicked the button. The download was fast, unnervingly fast, and in moments, a new filter appeared in her editing app. It was simply labeled "The Filter." With her heart racing, she applied it to a selfie she had just taken. At first glance, it didn't seem much different from the usual ones she used. But as she looked closer, she realized it was different. Her skin was smoother, unnaturally smooth, like porcelain. Her eyes gleamed with an almost inhuman brightness, and her lips had the perfect fullness. She looked flawless, like an ethereal version of herself. Danny posted the picture, feeling a rush of excitement. Within minutes, the likes started flooding in. The comments were immediate. "You're glowing, perfection. How do you always look so perfect?" Her phone buzzed nonstop with notifications. This was the best reaction she had ever gotten. It felt euphoric, addictive. For the rest of the night, she kept checking her profile, watching her follower count tick higher and higher. But as the night wore on, something strange began to happen. Danny was getting ready for bed, washing off her makeup, when she noticed something odd. Her reflection in the mirror didn't quite match what she expected. It looked more like the version of her from the selfie. Her skin was too smooth, her lips too full. She leaned in, heart pounding, touching her face. It still felt like her skin, but the person staring back at her didn't quite look like her. She blinked hard, stepping back from the mirror. Her reflection didn't move. Danny's breath caught in her throat. Her reflection was still standing there, perfectly still, staring back with a cold, unnatural smile. "No," she whispered, backing away from the mirror. Her reflection's grin widened, as if mocking her fear. And then, in a slow, deliberate motion, the reflection reached out, pressing its hand against the mirror. Danny watched in horror as cracks began to form around her reflection's hand, spider webbing out across the glass. Suddenly, the lights in her bathroom flickered. The cracks in the mirror deepened, and with a sickening snap, the glass shattered. But instead of falling away, it seemed to open, like a doorway. From the other side, her reflection stepped out. Danny screamed, stumbling backward. The thing that looked like her but wasn't stood on the other side of the room now, its grin impossibly wide, eyes glinting with malice. It tilted its head, studying her, like a predator sizing up its prey. What are you?" Danny stammered, her voice trembling. Her reflection didn't answer. Instead, it took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Danny scrambled for her phone, desperately trying to open the app, to delete the filter. But when she unlocked her phone, she saw that the reflection was already there, grinning at her from every photo in her camera roll. The images had all changed. Her face was warped, grotesque, yet eerily beautiful, with hollowed cheeks, sunken eyes, and that same chilling smile. A notification popped up. "You have unlocked true perfection." Danny's phone began to buzz uncontrollably. Her follower count was skyrocketing, millions upon millions. Her likes, her comments, everything was exploding in real time. But there was no joy in it anymore, only horror. Suddenly, the reflection lunged at her, its hands cold and sharp, pinning her to the floor. Danny tried to scream, but her voice caught in her throat. The last thing she saw before everything went dark was her own face, grinning down at her with eyes that no longer belonged to her. The next morning, Danny's fans were treated to a new post. It was a selfie, Danny Lee glowing and radiant, more beautiful than she had ever been. Her skin was flawless, her eyes sparkling, her lips perfectly plump. The comments were endless. "This is the best you've ever looked. How are you this perfect?" But if anyone looked closely, closer than most would, they'd notice something strange in the reflection of her eyes. A faint, shadowy figure, as if someone or something was trapped behind them, silently screaming to be let out. And if you swiped too far, past her picture-perfect smile and glowing skin, you might just hear a whisper, "Don't look in the mirror, I'm already here." No one in the fashion world knew her real name. She was simply called the seamstress, a shadowy figure whispered about behind the scenes, a legend that only the most desperate designers ever sought out. Her name wasn't written in fashion magazines, nor did she attend the prestigious runway shows of Paris, Milan, or New York. But it was said that if you were lucky enough, or perhaps unlucky enough to find her, she could turn your entire career around. The only catch? You had to be willing to pay the price, a price no one ever spoke of. Luca Armand had never believed in these kinds of stories. When he first moved to New York, fresh out of design school, his ambitions were as bright as the neon lights of Times Square. He dreamed of launching his own label, making a name for himself among the fashion elite, and seeing his creations on the most coveted runways in the world. But reality had hit hard, and after a few seasons of lukewarm reception, he was struggling just to keep the lights on in his tiny apartment. His latest collection had been a disaster. What he had imagined as a bold, avant-garde statement on modern streetwear had been criticized as derivative and confused. The reviews from Vogue and WD had been kinder than he'd expected, but the lack of enthusiasm was damning. Sales were non-existent. The investors, once cautiously optimistic, were pulling out. The fashion world was fickle, and Luca was dangerously close to being forgotten. It was during a particularly grim after-party, following a failed attempt to salvage his reputation at New York Fashion Week, that he first heard about the seamstress. "You've got talent, Luca, but you're missing something," said a familiar voice over the thumping music. Luca turned to see Victor Dumas, an older man who had been in the industry for decades, always lurking at the edges of parties, always watching, but rarely speaking. His reputation was as murky as his associations. No one really knew how he managed to stay relevant, but he seemed to know everyone who mattered. Victor's eyes gleamed with a strange intensity, the same way they always did when he was about to tell you something you didn't want to hear. Yeah, well, it's hard to make an impression when every other designer is stealing your thunder, Luca muttered, staring into his drink. The room buzzed with models, influencers, and designers far more successful than him. It felt suffocating. Victor leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. There's someone who can help, someone who can give your designs the edge they need. They'll be talking about your name for years. You'll be a legend. Luca scoffed. And what? I just wave a magic wand and suddenly I'm a fashion god? It doesn't work like that. No, Victor said, his tone serious. It doesn't, but she works like that. She? Luca asked, suddenly intrigued despite himself. The seamstress, Victor said, his lips curling into a knowing smile. If you're really serious about being remembered, she's the one you need. Luca frowned. He had heard bits and pieces about this so-called seamstress in fashion circles, always in whispers, always surrounded by a sense of foreboding, but he had never taken it seriously. Urban legends for stressed-out designers, he thought. Victor's face darkened. She can make your dreams come true, Luca, but you have to be ready to pay the price. And believe me, it's not always something you're prepared to give. Luca wanted to laugh it off, but something in Victor's eyes stopped him. They were cold, almost predatory. Victor was the last person Luca would call trustworthy, but he had connections, deep ones. If he was talking about this seamstress, maybe there was something more to it. Victor handed him a card. It was sleek, jet black, and the only thing printed on it was a single word in a white, elegant font. Seamstress. No phone number, no email, no address, just the name. How do I contact her? Luca asked, flipping the card over in his hands. You don't, Victor said, finishing his drink. She'll find you when you're ready. Luca spent the next few weeks obsessed with the idea. He tried to forget it, to focus on salvaging his brand with fresh designs, but every time he sat down to work, his mind wandered back to that card. He found himself sketching compulsively, filling page after page of his notebook with wild, almost frantic designs. Dark, beautiful, and eerie, unlike anything he had ever created. There was a sharpness, an edge to them that unsettled him. They seemed to come from somewhere else, as if his hand were guided by something outside himself. As days passed, things only got worse. Luca was slipping into desperation. Rent was overdue, his phone was ringing non-stop with calls from creditors, and the emails from his investors had grown colder and more dismissive. He knew his time was running out. Late one night, after hours of staring at his latest failed design, he finally gave in. He pulled out the black card from his desk drawer, turning it over and over in his hands. What the hell, he muttered to himself, his fingers tracing the word seamstress. At that exact moment, the lights in his apartment flickered. The temperature dropped sharply, and the hair on the back of his neck stood on end. There was a knock at the door. Luca froze. It was late, too late for anyone to be visiting. He hesitated for a moment, then slowly walked to the door and opened it. The seamstress walked slowly through his cramped living room, her long fingers brushing lightly against his scattered sketches. She stopped at the desk, picking up one of his newer designs, one of the dark, unsettling ones he had drawn in a near trance. This is good, she said, her voice quiet but firm. You have potential, but you need more. Luca swallowed hard. That's why you're here. She turned to face him, her gray eyes locking onto his. I can give you what you need, Luca. I can make you the designer you've always dreamed of being. But there is a price. Luca nodded, though fear was gnawing at his stomach. What kind of price? The seamstress smiled again, that cold smile. Something of yours, something precious must be given in return. It can be something small at first, a sliver of your ambition, a fragment of your soul, a piece of your essence. The more you want, the more you must give. Luca felt a chill run down his spine, but the weight of failure pressed too heavily on him. He couldn't walk away now. He had come too far. What do I have to do? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She stepped closer to him, her presence overwhelming. Create, design the collection of your dreams. And when it's done, I will return. We'll discuss payment then. With that, she turned and walked toward the door, disappearing into the hallway without a sound. Luca stood frozen for several moments, unsure if what had just happened was real or some strange fevered dream. But when he looked down at his desk, he saw the design she had touched. And something was different. The lines were sharper, more defined, as if the idea had come alive on the page. His hands trembled as he reached for his sketchpad, a strange compulsion washing over him. For the next week, Luca worked like a man possessed. He barely slept, barely ate, as he sketched out an entire collection. The designs flowed effortlessly from his mind to the paper, dark, dramatic, elegant in ways he had never achieved before. He used fabrics he had never considered, silhouettes that seemed to defy convention, and patterns that were hauntingly beautiful. It was as though his creative vision had been amplified tenfold. He was creating the best work of his life, and with each sketch, he felt the pull of success growing closer. But there was something wrong, too. Each time he completed a piece, a strange sensation tugged at him, like something was being drained from him. His energy dwindled. His reflection in the mirror looked haggard and pale, his eyes sunken and hollow. Still, he pressed on, unable to stop himself. When the collection was finished, Luca knew he had something extraordinary. He presented the designs to his team and investors, and the reaction was immediate. Everyone was blown away. Word spread quickly through the fashion world, and before he knew it, his phone was ringing off the hook with offers from top magazines and buyers. But then, just as the whirlwind of success began to engulf him, the seamstress returned. It was the night before his debut show at New York Fashion Week. Luca was in his apartment, preparing the final touches on the runway setup when the lights flickered once again. He didn't need to turn around to know she was there. "You've done well," she said, her voice soft but chilling. Luca turned to face her, his heart racing. "Thank you. The collection, everyone loves it." The seamstress smiled, that same cold, detached smile. "And now, it's time to settle our debt." He had known this moment was coming, but the reality of it still hit him like a freight train. His mouth went dry. What do you want?" The seamstress stepped closer, her gray eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I told you, Luca, the price is always a part of you. For this level of success, something significant must be given." Luca felt a lump forming in his throat. "What do you mean? I've already given—" "Not enough," she interrupted, her tone sharpening. "You've tasted true brilliance, true greatness, but it has cost you more than you realize. And now, the final payment must be made." She raised a hand, her fingers impossibly long, and pointed toward his chest. Lana Kelly was, by all standards, the epitome of beauty. Her symmetrical features, high cheekbones, and striking blue eyes had earned her a place among the top models in the world. Her face adorned the covers of major fashion magazines, and she walked runways in Paris, Milan, and New York. She was, without a doubt, at the peak of her career. But beauty in the modeling world is a fickle thing. It is both a gift and a curse, fleeting and fragile. Lana had always been hyper-aware of that. She watched young girls enter the industry, rise quickly, and then disappear just as fast. The fashion world had no mercy, and she knew her time at the top was limited. What bothered her most, though, wasn't the ticking clock of age or the inevitable lines that would one day crease her perfect skin. It was the fear that her success was due more to her looks than her talent. It ate away at her confidence, whispering in her mind that she was replaceable, that her beauty was a mask, and once it faded, she would be discarded. Lana wasn't always so insecure. At the beginning of her career, she had been confident, fierce, and unshakable. But with every passing year, as more faces appeared in the industry, newer, younger, fresher, her anxiety grew. She obsessed over every tiny imperfection, every pore, every strand of hair that was slightly out of place. She sought out treatments, skincare regimens, and cosmetic procedures, anything that could keep her appearance flawless. Then, one night, after an exhausting shoot in Paris, Lana was scrolling through her phone in her hotel room. Her body ached from hours of posing under harsh lights, but sleep eluded her. The endless parade of perfect faces on Instagram only deepened her unease. Everyone looked immaculate, no blemishes, no flaws. She felt her anxiety rise, a tightness in her chest. Suddenly, an ad appeared in her feed. It was simple, just a black square with white text that read, "Perfection is attainable. Let us help you become unforgettable. DM for details." Lana paused. It wasn't unusual for her to receive random advertisements. She was a model after all. But something about this one felt different. She clicked on the account. The page was almost bare, save for a few cryptic posts. One showed a before and after of a woman who had been transformed from ordinary to stunningly beautiful. Another depicted a close-up of a flawless face, the caption reading, "Perfection is within reach." Without thinking, Lana sent a DM. The reply came almost instantly. "You've been chosen. We can give you what you desire. Meet us at 35 Rue des Ombres, midnight. Come alone." Lana hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. She knew it was reckless. She didn't know who these people were or what they were offering, but the promise of perfection, it called to her. She had spent her entire career chasing an unattainable ideal. What if, just this once, it was within reach? Against her better judgment, she decided to go. After all, what did she have to lose? Rue des Ombres was tucked away in a forgotten corner of Paris, a narrow, winding street far from the glittering avenues of the fashion district. As Lana walked down the cobblestone alley, the streetlights grew dimmer and the air felt colder. She checked her phone. 11:58 p.m. She was close. Her heart pounded in her chest as she approached number 35, an old, weathered building that seemed abandoned. The windows were dark, and the door looked like it hadn't been opened in years. For a moment, she considered turning back. This was insane, but before she could make up her mind, the door creaked open. "Miss Kelly?" a voice called softly from the darkness inside. Lana swallowed her fear and stepped through the door. The inside of the building was nothing like its exterior. It was sleek, modern, and minimalistic. The air smelled faintly of lavender, and the lighting was soft, casting everything in a warm glow. A woman in a tailored black dress approached her, her face a mask of professional calm. "We've been expecting you," she said, her voice low and soothing. "Please follow me." Lana was led down a long hallway into a room that resembled a high-end spa. The walls were lined with mirrors, and a plush reclining chair sat in the center. A table next to the chair held an array of strange, gleaming instruments, none of which Lana recognized. I'm not sure what I'm here for," Lana said, her voice wavering slightly. The woman smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're here because you seek perfection. You're here because you want to be more than just beautiful. You want to be unforgettable." Lana nodded slowly. "Yes." "We can give you that," the woman said, motioning to the chair. "Our procedure is revolutionary. You will never need makeup, never need surgery, never worry about aging or imperfections again. Your face will be flawless, always." Lana's heart raced. It sounded too good to be true, but the desperation she had been feeling overwhelmed her better judgment. She needed this. She needed to stay relevant, to stay perfect. Without another word, she sat in the chair. The procedure was unlike anything Lana had ever experienced. It was painless, almost soothing, as the woman worked around her face with the strange instruments. The world around her faded into a dreamlike haze, and her body relaxed completely. She could feel something happening, her skin tightening, her features sharpening, but it wasn't unpleasant. If anything, it felt like her body was finally aligning with the perfect image she had always envisioned. When the woman finally stepped back, Lana blinked herself out of the daze. Her head felt light, almost weightless. "It's done," the woman said, her tone final. Lana sat up slowly, her heart pounding with anticipation. She turned toward one of the mirrors lining the room, expecting to see herself transformed, perfected. But what she saw in the mirror made her stomach drop. Her face was still beautiful, there was no denying that, but it wasn't her face. Her features were sharper, her cheekbones more pronounced, her lips fuller, but it was wrong. Her eyes, those striking blue eyes that had defined her career, were hollow, lifeless. It was as if the spark, the essence that made her Lana Kelly, was gone. This isn't me," she whispered, reaching up to touch her face. Her skin felt strange under her fingers, almost plastic. The woman behind her smiled, the same cold, emotionless smile as before. "You wanted perfection, and perfection, my dear, is no longer you. It's what we make you." Panic surged through Lana as she stared at her reflection. Her eyes darted around the room, to the other mirrors, and to her horror, she saw her reflection in all of them. But they were all slightly different. In one mirror, her nose was more angular. In another, her lips were thinner. Each reflection showed a different version of her, as if her face was changing in real time, adapting, morphing. "What's happening to me?" she gasped, backing away from the mirrors. "You wanted to be unforgettable," the woman said, her voice calm, almost clinical. "But to become unforgettable, you must become everyone's ideal. Your face is no longer fixed. It will shift and change to match whatever version of perfection the viewer desires." Lana's mind reeled. "That's impossible. No face can do that." The woman stepped closer, her gaze cold and detached. "You no longer have a face of your own. You are a canvas, a mirror to the desires of others. When people look at you, they will see their perfect vision of beauty, but you will never see the same face twice." Lana's breath came in short gasps as she looked back at the mirrors. Her reflection was shifting again, her nose shrinking, her eyes widening slightly. She stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair. "This can't be real," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Please, undo this. I don't want this anymore." The woman's smile faded, replaced by a cold, hard look. There is no undoing perfection. Lana left the building in a daze, her mind racing. The woman's words echoed in her head as she stumbled down Rue des Ombres. Her face felt foreign, like a mask she couldn't take off. Every time she caught a glimpse of herself in a window or reflective surface, her reflection was different. Sometimes she looked younger, sometimes older, but it was never her. It was never Lana. She tried to return to her hotel, but she couldn't face the idea of seeing herself in the bathroom mirror. She didn't want to know what she would look like next. Instead, she wandered aimlessly through the dark streets of Paris, her thoughts spiraling out of control. Hours passed before she finally made her way back to the hotel. Her legs ached, and her eyes burned from crying. She hadn't seen anyone on the streets, but she feared the moment she would. She feared what they would see when they looked at her. She slipped through the hotel lobby without making eye contact with anyone. Her body felt heavy, her heart pounding in her chest, as she rode the elevator up to her room. When she entered, the first thing she did was cover the mirrors. Every reflective surface was a threat, a reminder of what she had become. She curled up on the bed, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The following day, Lana woke to a dozen missed calls from her agent, designers, and photographers. She was supposed to meet with several top designers in the morning to discuss new campaign offers. But the thought of facing anyone sent a wave of nausea through her. Still, she couldn't avoid them forever. Her career was all she had left. She had to push through. Dressing carefully, she pulled on a pair of oversized sunglasses and wrapped a scarf around her face before leaving her hotel room. She kept her head down as she made her way to the meeting, avoiding every reflective surface along the way. The designers greeted her warmly, but Lana could feel their eyes on her. As the meeting went on, she noticed something strange. Their expression shifted. Some of them smiled more, while others looked at her with a mix of awe and envy. It was subtle at first, but soon she realized what was happening. They weren't seeing her. They were seeing their asterisk version of perfection. She could see it in their eyes, in the way they spoke to her. To each of them, she was becoming something different. Lana's heart raced as she excused herself, fleeing the meeting and rushing out of the building. She ducked into an alley, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She had thought she could manage it, that she could live with this curse, but now she understood. She was no longer herself. She was a living, breathing illusion, a reflection of everyone else's desires. She would never see her true face again. Months passed, and Lana's career soared higher than ever. She became a sensation, her face appearing on every magazine cover, her image plastered on billboards across the world. Designers clamored to work with her, photographers begged for the chance to shoot her, but none of them knew the truth. Every time Lana looked in the mirror, she saw someone else staring back at her. Every person she met, every gaze that fell upon her, twisted her face into something new. She had become a chameleon, a living doll molded by the desires of others. She was unforgettable, just as the seamstress had promised. But Lana no longer knew who she was, and that, she realized, was the true price of perfection. There's something unsettling about amusement parks after dark. In the daylight, they're places of joy, laughter, and excitement. Families, teenagers, and children running from ride to ride, their faces lit with happiness. But when the sun sets and the crowds thin, when the bright, colorful lights dim into eerie glows, they become something else entirely. And when you're alone in one, well, that's when things get strange. I used to work at Brighton Funland, an old amusement park on the outskirts of a small town. It wasn't a big, flashy theme park like Disneyland or Six Flags, but it had a charm of its own. The kind of place where you'd find creaky wooden roller coasters, slow spinning carousels, and carnival games that looked like they hadn't been updated in 50 years. The park was open all summer, and for a teenager looking for summer work, it was perfect. I started working there the summer after my junior year of high school. My job was simple. I operated the Whirlwind, a spinning ride that left you dizzy and disoriented after just a few minutes. It was nothing fancy, but I liked the simplicity of it. Push the button to start, pull the lever to stop, and make sure the kids didn't puke all over the seats. The first few months were uneventful, just normal summer stuff. The park was always busy during the day, packed with families and teenagers. But there was one thing about the park that everyone knew, but no one talked about. You see, Brighton Funland had a history. It had been around for decades, and in that time, there had been a few accidents. A little boy fell from the Ferris wheel in the 1970s. A girl drowned in the pool under the log flume in the 1980s. And then there was the roller coaster. That was the one everyone whispered about. The Devil's Drop, a massive wooden coaster, had been shut down for years after someone, a teenager, had disappeared. People said he fell from the coaster, but they never found a body. Just gone. No one rode the Devil's Drop anymore. It sat there, looming over the park like a ghost of its former self, rotting and forgotten. It was late August when things started to get weird. The park was winding down for the season, and the crowds had thinned. The once bustling pathways were now quiet, with only a handful of visitors trickling in each day. Most of the staff had gone back to school or quit, leaving only a skeleton crew to finish out the last few weeks. That's when I started noticing things. The first night it happened, I was locking up the Whirlwind after closing. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park. I was the last one on duty, and as I turned the key in the lock, I heard it, a faint sound, like laughter. But not the kind of laughter you hear from happy families or kids on a ride. This was different. It was faint, distant, almost like it was coming from somewhere deep within the park. I stopped and listened, but the sound faded, leaving only the hum of the lights overhead and the distant creak of the Devil's Drop in the wind. I shrugged it off as my imagination and made my way to the employee exit. The next night it happened again. This time, I was walking past the Ferris wheel when I heard it. That same laughter. But it was closer now, more distinct, like someone was standing just behind me, laughing softly under their breath. I spun around, but the path behind me was empty. Just shadows and the flickering glow of a few dying lights. I didn't tell anyone about it at first. I figured it was just nerves. Being alone in the park at night had a way of playing tricks on your mind. But then one night, something happened that I couldn't explain. It was a Friday night, one of the last weekends before the park was set to close for the season. The sun had set hours ago, and I was finishing up my shift when I got a call from the park manager, Dave. "Hey, can you check on the Devil's Drop?" he asked, sounding annoyed. "Some idiot kid's probably snuck in there again. Security's out sick and I don't want to deal with it." I hesitated. I didn't like going near the Devil's Drop. No one did. The ride had been shut down for years, but it still stood there towering over the park like a skeleton. The tracks were rusted, and the cars sat motionless on the platform, covered in dust and cobwebs. The whole thing gave off a bad vibe. "Sure," I said reluctantly. "I'll go check it out." Grabbing a flashlight from the office, I made my way across the park toward the roller coaster. As I approached, the air seemed to grow colder, and the familiar hum of the park faded into silence. I could see the massive wooden structure looming ahead, barely visible in the dim light. The entrance was roped off, with a large closed sign hanging on the gate. I shone my flashlight around, looking for any sign of the supposed trespassers. At first there was nothing, just the wind rustling through the wooden beams and the soft creak of the abandoned ride. But as I moved closer to the entrance, I saw it. Movement. Something or someone was standing at the base of the coaster. "Hey," I called out, my voice shaky. "The park's closed. You're not supposed to be here." The figure didn't move. It just stood there, still as a statue, facing the ride. My heart pounded in my chest as I shone the flashlight toward it. The light caught the edge of what looked like a red jacket, a flash of color in the dark. "Hello?" I called again, taking a cautious step forward. But as I approached, the figure suddenly moved, darting toward the coaster with inhuman speed. My breath caught in my throat as I watched it disappear into the shadows beneath the tracks. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind racing. Who the hell was that? No normal person could move that fast, and why were they heading toward the Devil's Drop? Against every instinct, I found myself moving toward the ride. Something about the figure had pulled me in, a strange compulsion I couldn't shake. As I reached the entrance, I noticed the gate was slightly ajar, the chain that had held it shut hanging loosely from the latch. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the gate open and stepped inside. The air was thick and heavy as I made my way toward the loading platform. The coaster loomed overhead, its skeletal frame casting long shadows in the moonlight. The wood creaked and groaned with every gust of wind, and the faint smell of rot hung in the air. My flashlight beam flickered as I swept it across the platform. The cars sat there, covered in dust, their once bright paint chipped and faded. I took a step forward, my heart racing in my chest. That's when I heard it again, laughter. But this time, it wasn't distant, it was right behind me. I spun around, my flashlight swinging wildly through the dark, but there was no one there, just the empty platform and the silent tracks. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. No answer. I turned back toward the ride, and that's when I saw it. The first car of the coaster was no longer empty. Someone was sitting there. I could see their silhouette, hunched over in the front seat, motionless. My blood ran cold as I stared at the figure. The dim light caught the edge of their jacket, a red jacket, the same red jacket I'd seen earlier. I took a step back, my breath coming in short gasps. Something was very, very wrong. "Hey!" I called out, my voice trembling. "The park's closed. You need to leave." The figure didn't move. It just sat there, silent, staring straight ahead. I took another step back, ready to bolt, when suddenly the ride came to life. The old rusted machinery groaned and clanked as the cars jerked forward, the sound of metal on metal echoing through the night. My heart leapt into my throat as I watched the coaster slowly climb the first hill, the figure still sitting in the front seat, motionless. There was no way this was happening. The ride had been shut down for years. The power was off. There was no one in the control booth, but somehow the coaster was moving, and it was climbing higher. My legs felt like lead as I watched the car disappear over the top of the first drop, plunging into the darkness below. The wind howled through the wooden beams as the cars rattled down the track, faster and faster, the sound growing louder with each passing second. But something was wrong. The coaster was moving too fast. The cars were shaking violently, the old wood creaking under the strain. Suddenly, the air was filled with the deafening sound of snapping wood. The tracks buckled and cracked, and before I could react, the cars flew off the rails, crashing to the ground below with a sickening crunch. I stumbled backward, my hands trembling as the dust settled around the wreckage. The coaster lay in a twisted heap of metal and wood, the cars smashed beyond recognition. For a moment, everything was silent. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching through the debris. I stared at the wreckage, my heart pounding in my ears. The figure in the red jacket was standing amidst the twisted remains of the coaster, their body unnaturally contorted, limbs bent at odd angles. But they were standing. I took a step back, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. No one could survive that. The figure's head slowly turned toward me, their face obscured by shadows. Then they spoke. "Do you want to ride again? I don't remember how I got out of there." The next thing I knew, I was running through the park, my legs moving on autopilot, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I didn't stop until I reached the employee lot and jumped into my car. I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My mind was a blur, racing with thoughts that I couldn't process. Who was that figure? How had the ride started? What had I just witnessed? I didn't sleep that night. The next morning I called in sick. I couldn't go back to the park, not after what I had seen, but I couldn't stay away forever. After a few days, curiosity got the better of me, and I returned. The park was quiet, as always, and the Devil's Drop was still standing, silent and broken. There was no sign of the wreckage, no sign that the coaster had ever moved. I asked Dave about it, but he just shrugged. "The ride's been shut down for years," he said. "No one goes near it." I didn't push the issue. I didn't want to know the answer. But every time I pass by the park at night, I hear it, that faint, distant laughter. And I know, somewhere in the darkness, the Devil's Drop is waiting for its next rider.